Welcome back to the Nueva Vida Group podcast. As you know, we're a privately owned real estate advisory company that supports the high net worth and ultra high net worth community on real estate acquisitions, project management, and development. And today we're going to talk about, I suppose, the difference between an off-market property and an on-market property, and some examples that we've done over the years. I think it's maybe quite a good topic. I don't think people really realise what the difference actually is, and I suppose the advantages and the disadvantages of both. I think should you start into it?
It's quite a hot topic, isn't it, at the moment
Yeah,
as well? Because I think people hear a lot of sort of about off-market transactions, but I don't think buyers
what's
always
that mean? Yeah,
know what the difference is. Yeah, what does it mean? I think they sort of generally understand, but I don't think they understand how
I've
they
had
access
yeah,
it.
I've had people
And
say, "Well, if it's off market, well, then how was it bought?" It's sometimes
yeah,
it
no,
is, sometimes as simple as that. Yeah,
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think people sort of quite realise, everyone has access to off-market properties. It just depends on who you're working with that can
yeah.
give you that access.
Well, what's your definition now, I suppose, of an off market property?
I think for me, it's quite often our experience is homes that actually aren't always necessarily for sale.
Yeah,
So we have a client brief that comes to us that we're working with a client, and because of I think our reputation, I think our network, I think the community that we have around us, we can unlock homes that aren't necessarily for sale or are sort of protected from the open market. They're
yeah,
the two things that I sort of focus on. One is where the home isn't necessarily on the market for sale because the owner wants to keep it very private, and they understand that the buyer might also want it to be quite private. I mean, we can talk about that in a bit more detail, but that's probably the most common example. And I think the second thing is, often homes, we're going to talk about a transaction in particular, aren't we, that
yeah.
was sold off market, but it was actually the owner of that home didn't really know whether he wanted to sell or not at the time. It's just because of our network, we were able to sort of understand they would potentially sell it,
Mm,
knew it met our buyers and our private clients' needs fully.
yeah,
And that's how that transaction was sort of made to happen.
yeah.
What about you? How would
Yeah,
you?
an off market. I think again, it's almost privacy first. It's people where
Mm.
either they haven't decided that if they want to sell it, or they want to keep it private. They almost have like a private launch or something like that, where it's between their own network, where they don't want the online presence to see it. People forget that if your property is online or on market, as you say, I mean that is available to the world, so people can
Mm.
see the property that you're doing, and sometimes
Well,
I think
we've had examples, haven't we, where there was a home, beautiful home,
yeah,
and we can't name it, but well, we can because it was on the market in Zagaleta called the Cullinan. We had a potentially interested party who was potentially interested in that,
yeah,
saw lots of YouTube videos about the home, and instantly they weren't interested anymore.
yeah,
Yeah, it was completely turned off the idea. They
yeah.
realised that now everyone had access to what their home was like, and they didn't want that. It sort of spoilt it for them.
Yeah, I think it's important to say there's nothing wrong with both. I mean, they're both completely
No,
viable options. So we need to just make that abundantly clear. It's all
yeah.
down to circumstance and the individual, the owner or the developer doing it. But I mean that goes on quite nicely. I think on market is almost the opposite. So the only way I would describe this is that this is something that you can see online. This is something that's been publicized everywhere. It's on all the major portals around the world. You can see the prices, you can see the details, you can see the design specs, and it's almost a shop window. Essentially, I think everyone has access to it. Everyone can see it. Everyone can visit it. So I think it's really
I
is
think
as simple as that.
Yeah, I think for some buyers, and I think you got to remember as well, not all properties that are on the market, everyone will have access to do the viewings. You've got to really, a lot
Yeah,
of the sellers now want pre-qualified buyers.
yeah,
But I think, you know, some buyers and private clients take a lot of comfort of being able to see and understand all the detail before they invest their time and energy to go and see it.
yeah,
So there's a real balance there of making sure you're sort of providing enough information to a potential buyer to
yeah,
engage them, because they can make a decision pretty quickly as whether they like it or not. And
yeah,
actually, quite often, making sure there's enough information available
Yeah,
is
it's like,
really, really important.
everything's transparent. There's all the data is available. You can compare, all the things that you can do nowadays when you've shortlisted 9 properties that are on the market. You can,
But you did a really good analysis, mate, didn't you, of the differences between and the benefits of
yeah,
and negatives. So,
there's more pros and cons. So I mean, let's say we're talking about an on-market property. So there's, say it's a 4-bed apartment, €1 million, right? So everyone can see it. I would say the benefit for that, I mean, it's very transparent. You can quite clearly see what the price is. It's easy access to it. So you've got all the information, you've got all the floor plans, you've got the local amenities and proximities to all the things. So you can really get a gauge exactly what it is. And I think, depending, again, it's all depending on the circumstance and the preference, but, particularly if you're a first time investor or a first time buyer or buying a holiday at home for the first time, it's almost good to see that so you can see it from a whole approach. So then, the ideal scenario is then you have 4 or 5 of these, all the data is available, you've shortlisted it, and then you go into phase 2. I'll say the cons, or the disadvantage necessarily, is that there's a lot of competition. So, especially at certain price points, you could be, say you arrange a viewing on a Friday morning, you could be one of 15 parties viewing that property.
yeah.
So, that is something you have to be aware of. And there's also maybe a little bit less negotiation power, I think, for an on-market property. I think, they know, especially in certain aspects of the world, someone will come in and pay above asking. And, some owners know that. So they will hold out. There'll be a lot more kind of strict, maybe strict's the wrong word, but less flexible or less, comes to some sort of agreement. And inflated prices really, I think, is the summary I would use for that one.
But yeah, that can be a problem, especially in an open sort of broker market.
Yeah.
And I think buyers do need someone that can handhold them how to negotiate what price is the right price to be paying for that home.
Yeah.
Um,
You got to remember that the owners are being guided by the brokers taking the property on. So
exactly
you
right.
have to understand that. That's not a cliche of how real estate is done, but you have to be aware of the fact that some brokers will put a higher price on to get the exclusivity, if you will, and that is just the nature of the beast. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. So sometimes they could be 10, 15, 20% above what you would expect, or what we would know is what the true value of that property is. So
I think that's been the case in all real estate markets forever and a day is an overvaluation, but I think that doesn't necessarily mean it's not negotiable or there isn't a price that can be agreed between the two parties. But you certainly see that more with properties that are visible and on the market rather than off the market, don't you?
Absolutely. I think the pros for off-market properties, I think the first thing is that there's better negotiation. I think you can have a direct relationship with the owner, more or less, or the developer directly. And I think that's always an easier, and you can have a frank conversation. So I think that is just an advantage in general. Obviously, there's less competition because of the certain price points some of these properties are. Is that your lane is a little bit smaller, which is a good thing. And then obviously access. I mean, you're seeing some homes which we know from first-hand experience are some of the best homes in the world. And if you're trying to find this trophy asset or a specific type of home, the chances are that it is going to be an off-market home because it doesn't exist on the on-market. The cons, not necessarily cons, but I'll probably say the trade-offs of the pros for an off-market. So they are, the properties on there, they're harder to find. And I suppose getting the initial access to this stuff, you need to have certain network, you need to have trust, and you almost need to have a track record of being able to deliver at this price point to be able to talk and have access to these homes. Another thing, if they're not on market, I think your due diligence has to be on point. You have to know everything. So will that cost more maybe in legal fees perhaps, but it's well worth every penny investing in that. So I think it's worth talking about, how deals like this come about and how we in the past have actually sourced deals in on and off market situations. So Jack, what's your take on that?
I think the big thing, the big takeaway with looking at the market generally, it's all about relationships and access, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, we know full well that if we get a brief from a client, one of our private clients, they're looking for X, we know exactly who to go and speak to. that will give us access to on and off market properties.
Yeah.
The big thing I'd say with the focus on off market properties, and you touched on it earlier when you were talking about the value, it's not always just high value properties, but in a lot of the cases it is. And actually the sellers, of those homes, only work again with similar like-minded, highly respected and trusted individuals. So I think the whole process needs to be very quiet, very focused. And I know that you and I spend a lot of time working with, lawyers, family offices, accountants, really well-respected brokers. In all of the markets we work in, we work with the top and trusted brokers, and we've built a long-term relationship with them. I think that's what gives us the confidence to then go and look, with these people and access these off-market properties. I think that's, having, long time in the game, people that have got a lot of track record and experience in the markets that we operate in, understand how we work, understand what our clients want, and are able to then source those properties with us. And likewise, we can even do it within our own relationships, direct to the sellers. We know sellers directly, we know their representatives, we know if they'd consider selling, what price they would consider selling for. And I think it really always does come back to that point that, relationships, getting those relationships right and working with at that sort of trusted level gives buyers especially a huge advantage, but also sellers.
Yeah.
They know if we're knocking on the door, not figuratively, literally turning up and knocking on the door, but they know that if we've made an approach either directly to them or directly with their representative, they know it's serious. And I think, in a market, especially where there's a lot of noise, a lot of activity, a lot of bad actors, to have that sort of track record and trust helps the whole deal come together.
Yeah.
I know when we're agreeing,
sorry.
I was going to say, I know when we're agreeing prices as well, a lot of our clients lean on us to say, well, what price should I pay? Is the asking price the right price? We're able to give them that data and say, well, this is what we would recommend making an offer. But because it's coming from us, and generally the seller will be aware of our track record, they'll look at that and take it, very seriously. They, very often may not agree with it, but they'll want to find a common ground. And I think that's the key, especially in the off-market space, is that all parties are trying to find a common ground. They're trying to make sure the deal's very smooth, very quiet, lots of NDAs and lots of privacy. And I think it makes the whole process quite slick. It gives both sides a lot of comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can go into some actual real examples of this. I mean, we can't go into too much detail, but obviously the more recent off-market transaction we did was for Villa Toscana, wasn't it?
Yeah, Villa Toscana is a great example because, the client was referred to us by an advisor in Dubai. The client I met in Marbella. I then showed the client 6 homes that are on the market. And on those viewings, I got a phone call from an agent that we work really closely with. Said, look, I know you're out viewing. I've got a house that's not for sale, but the seller would consider selling it.
Yeah.
It could be perfect. It's a little bit more than your client's looking to spend. Why don't you come and have a look? And so property number 7, we went and saw it that afternoon. The client fell in love with it. Sat there for a long time, much longer than all the other viewings, fell in love with the home instantly. And then we were able to, over the course of a couple of days, because we knew the owner of the home, we knew the owner's agent really, really well, we were able to talk quite openly and just come to a really good agreement and a really good deal. And that's an ideal situation. I think that's one of the best examples we've got. But there's lots of others that are very similar to that. And then there's others that are sort of developer sales. So someone's building out.
That was one in Madrid where it was very much an opportunity to get in
Yeah.
one of the last units available in this development in Madrid. And, it wasn't on the market. It was an off-market presentation. And we got the last unit. It was exactly what the client wanted from the kind of rental investment unit in Madrid. And it was probably one of the quickest deals we've ever done as well. So
that's a great example, isn't it? Where the developer, knew that we were in the market, didn't have it for sale, was going to wait to complete the unit and agreed to sell it to our client before it completed. I mean, that's a real advantage for a buyer. I think it just shows that actually being able to navigate that relationship and navigate at that level in the market,
Yeah.
Does open doors, does open opportunities. And they might not always be right.
No.
Some off-market properties we're offered are not right. There's a lot of things that, red flags that come up, and we're
They're
like,
off
well, that's just
market and
not
they
one
have
for our
to,
clients.
yeah, remain off market. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. So,
But it's great when it comes together. I think the two examples we've just given are,
yeah,
brilliant examples.
absolutely. Well, yeah, I think that was a really good podcast. I think it's important to know that, one of the biggest disadvantages of doing off-market properties is that we can't actually market the success of what we do because we're bound strictly by NDA. So we can't name drop all the amazing people that we've done deals with, which would really help, but it is what it is. So I hope you enjoyed that. I think, just giving a brief explanation of what the difference is between on and off-market properties, because that term is used a lot, and the pros and cons for both. So any questions, or if we can help in any way, get in touch, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.